Welcome to Weird PVD, the podcast. Every week, your host, Sherry Kasperzak, takes you to the odd corners of beautiful Providence, Rhode Island. From big blue bugs to unique art, from weird history to weird food, you'll never look at Rhode Island's creative capital the same again. Tune in every Weird Wednesday. So, riddle me this, PVD weirdos. Have you ever seen a real-life vampire? And I'm not talking about that ex who drained the life out of you. We've all got one of those. I'm talking an honest-to-goodness vampire. Well, Rhode Island is home to one of the last vampires, but not really. Now, if you're watching on YouTube and you can see my face, this whole situation, I just wanted to let you know that I have not, in fact, been punched in the eye. I have, however, managed to contract a wicked case of pink eye, and how a grown human who has no day-to-day interactions with small children in this year of 2025 gets pink eye is beyond me. But here we are. That's how dedicated I am to providing you all the best Rhode Island legends. I'm doing this with my right eye almost swollen shut. You're welcome. And before we get down to the gritty details in the story, I want to warn you that if gore and gross stuff makes you queasy, you might want to skip this episode and jump into a different one because the details get a little gruesome. Now that you've been warned, let's dive in. Mercy Brown, a 19-year-old woman who died in 1892, was never actually called a vampire. But what happened to her is even more appalling than anything you would see in a Bela Lugosi or Christopher Lee film. And the kicker comes at the end of this story, long after Mercy's mutilated remains were reinterred. Young Mercy wasn't the only one to be dealt such a horrific posthumous fate. At the end of this episode, I'll read the names of every single person who was dealt a similar fate in the century in which folklore and superstition drove people to do the unthinkable. I think it's important to honor the memory of those whose earthly remains were desecrated. Today on Weird PVD, we're traveling back into time to the 18th century when folklore ruled and people didn't have a great grasp on how diseases worked. Tuberculosis, also known as consumption, spread like wildfire through families, and in the 1700s and 1800s, no one really knew why. It was widely believed that deceased relatives drained the life out of the living, particularly when many family members fell ill and died in short succession. And a lot of times those dead relatives were dug up, and if they hadn't properly decomposed, or at least hadn't decomposed enough, they were often considered responsible for the TB outbreak in that family. In the late 18th and 19th centuries, a TB outbreak in New England led to the exhumation and desecration of many bodies. In a lot of cases, these bodies were ripped open and their organs removed, and in some cases they were even beheaded. In the Brown family of Exeter, Rhode Island, Mercy's mother, Mary Eliza, was the first to die of TB in 1883, followed a few months later by her eldest daughter, Mary Olive, in June of 1884. Now, both Mercy and her brother Edwin fell ill, and when Mercy died, the Brown family suspected that some dead family member was responsible for Edwin's illness. Now, this is where the story goes absolutely off the rails. Mercy's father, George Brown, was convinced by family members and friends that some dead family member was making Edwin sick. He exhumed several of his relatives' bodies, including his wife, his eldest daughter, and Mercy. Now, apparently Mary Eliza and Mary Olive had decomposed enough to rule them out as the culprit for Edwin's disease. Mercy, however, was a little too fresh for their liking. God forbid a girl have a skincare routine, am I right? And because our girl was a little too well moisturized, her corpse was opened up and her heart and liver were removed. Now buckle up, because this is where all of my flabbers were gasted. Her heart and liver were burned, and George and company put the ashes in water, mixed it all up, and gave it to Edwin, who drank this concoction. Have a moment to process, because I need one. Mercy, or what was left of her, was reinterred at the Baptist Church Cemetery in Exeter. And today, people leave trinkets at her grave to memorialize a young woman who got the raw end of a really shitty rumor mill. I want to remind you, this happened in 1892, and that may seem like a long time ago, but let's unpack some of the technologies that existed at the same time Mercy was ripped from her grave and cut apart. We've got electric lights, indoor plumbing, early automobiles, telephones, electric fans, and even motion pictures. So that's the horrifying tale of Mercy Brown, New England's last vampire. But she wasn't the first. And I think it's important to honor the memory of those who suffered a similar fate. I'm going to read the names of some other victims of the New England vampire scare of the 17th and 18th centuries. Rachel Harris Burton of Manchester, New Hampshire in 1793. An unnamed resident of New Ipswich, New Hampshire in 1810, Samuel Saladay of Scioto County, Ohio, sorry if I mispronounced that, in 1817, Frederick Ransom of South Woodstock, Vermont in 1817, John Barber of Griswold, Connecticut in 1843, an anonymous person in Boston, Massachusetts in the 1860s, and Mercy Brown of Exeter, Rhode Island in 1892. And if you want to know the kicker, Mercy's father, George, he lived until 1922. He saw the first use of the tuberculosis vaccine, the Bacillus Calmette-Guerin vaccine, in 1921. And I don't know about you, but my mind is blown by how little time passed between George digging up his dead family and the development of a tuberculosis vaccine. In just 30 years, we went from having no grasp of transmission to having a means to annihilate it. Now, Mercy isn't the only legend Rhode Island is well known for. Spooky season is in full swing, so let's talk about the Ness Monster and Big Rhody. As the name suggests, the Ness Monster is a strange aquatic creature spotted off the coast of Block Island. Now, here's the weird thing about the Ness Monster. Unlike the elusive Loch Ness Monster in Scotland, for whom the Rhode Island serpent is named, the Ness Monster was only discovered after it was already dead. According to Hangar One Publishing, a group of fishermen pulled the creature's 14-foot-long carcass from the ocean back in 1996. Now, allegedly, the carcass was stored in a biologist's freezer where it was being kept for further study. Now, the carcass disappeared one day and it hasn't been seen since. Was it snatched up by a rival researcher, or did the government take it to cover up something they already knew existed? Inquiring minds want to know. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, here are some photos of the alleged Ness Monster carcass. Now, conventional wisdom says these are the remains of a basking shark, but don't let that get in the way of a good legend. And here's a pro tip for you. If you haven't seen the iconic Mother Ocean video from about 15 years ago, you have got to watch it. In fact, I'm linking it everywhere you can find Weird PVD, the podcast. Once you're done watching or listening here, run, don't walk to go see the Mother Ocean video. I'm not going to spoil it for you. There's a lot to unpack. It's a wild ride, so treat yourself. Go watch the Mother Ocean video. Who's big and hairy and lives by the sea? No, it is not SpongeBob SquarePants. It's Big Rhody. This big guy, who is reportedly 7'2" and conveniently 401 pounds, is Little Rhody's answer to Bigfoot. Now, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call him, many places have their own version of this beast, which some people believe is evidence of a missing link between primates and early humans. Or maybe it's just some guy in a gorilla suit. Florida has skunk ape, white thang roams Alabama. I mean, people, the jokes write themselves. And wild man romps the wilderness of California. Big Rhody, who is also known in some places as Swamp Sasquatch, which is really hard to say, is Rhode Island's the hairy creature. The Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, BFRO, and yes, that is a real thing, received this report from a witness who shared their story from the summer of 1978. The witness saw something in Charlestown, Rhode Island. Here's the report in its entirety. I've told very few people this story for fear that they might think I'm crazy. The only reason why I'm taking the time to report this is because of a recent entry a friend of mine who knew my story told me about. My story takes place in Charlestown, Rhode Island in the late 1970s. My mother and father and I lived in a wooded area abutting the Indian Cedar Swamp and property owned by United Nuclear, which probably comprises several thousand acres. The property surrounding our home was mixed white Atlantic juniper swamp, scarlet, red, and white oaks with old-growth white pine stands mixed in, with a dense understory of briars, mountain laurel, and blueberry brush. We lived off a road with 3 houses on it. The houses were all built close to the entrance of this development. The road was part of a series of roads that were put in at the start of the development. The roads were oiled gravel and had been left to grow in after years of little or no use. It looked like the developer had started and went belly up. These roads were great to ride bikes on or take an evening cruise on after bringing my father dinner at his second job. My mother drove a baby blue Mustang Mach 1, and she would drive around the roads with me looking at deer before we retired to our home for the evening. As a kid, I remember this being a highlight to the evening. I was at the time maybe 8 years old, and my mother and I on this particular night in the late 70s commenced to ride around the roads to see if we could see any deer. It had been raining earlier with thunder and lightning mixed in. Now it was just raining. We were rounding a corner on one of the roads that paralleled the Indian Cedar Swamp, and as we started downward, we noticed the road was obstructed by a large blown down oak tree. The tree had green leaves. This makes me think it was summer or early fall on it, so it had recently come down. We guessed maybe in the storm earlier, possibly lightning. The road was very narrow, and the brush along the side of the road made it difficult to back the car around to turn around. The rain was falling, but not heavy. The wipers were on, the headlights on the car were on as well. As my mother turned the front end of the car, the lights cast on the left side of the road, where the tree had been broken off from its stump. We were maybe 1.5 car lengths from the stump. Beside the tall, fractured stump stood what looked like a large yellow-white ape. It was maybe 6 to 7 feet tall. Its hair was long, face flat, long, massive arms. Its head appeared to be without any neck. Its chest was broad. My mother and I froze momentarily, 5 seconds, maybe 10, and the figure remained still, staring at us. My mother floored the car into reverse. I remember the terror of it all. The sound of gravel hitting inside the fender wells, the sound of the brush crushing against the car, and then the acceleration as she sped off. We were clear as to what we saw, and we have no question in our mind that we saw something or someone in ape-like shape that night. This we are certain of. We need no one to tell us what we saw. It's crystal clear. For years, we told no one. We would talk about it in our home in privacy, and even my father found this story hard to accept. We've never forgotten this, and this story would have never been told if it wasn't for someone else informing me of a similar sighting. I'm now in my 30s, an extremely active hunter, farmer, and woodsman. I hunt deer 40 days a year in Maine, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New Jersey. I use automated cameras which are triggered by heat. I've never seen a picture of Bigfoot on my film. I have seen pictures of deer on my 50-acre tract of land that I would never believe are there if I didn't see it on my film. I know every inch of my land and the surrounding property, and these mystery deer show up at all hours on my cameras, and frequently at that. How can they move right around our hunting parties in such a small area and never be seen? I'll never know. Even today, I find it hard to accept what we definitely saw. I'm not a fan of ghosts, UFOs, or even Bigfoot. I'm not sure to this day what I saw wasn't a man dressed in a costume, dressed up out in a rainstorm, a half mile or more from my home, waiting for my mother and me to drive down the road to give us a scare. The only thing I can say is it was a damn good costume and a damn good plan. We saw what we saw, and this is something I would swear to on any polygraph test, as I'm sure my mother would. End of story. Another witness submitted this report to the BFRO from Great Neck Road in South Kingstown. Here's the report in its entirety. I have recently become very interested in Bigfoot research, and based on reports that I found on this website of previous incidents in the area, decided to go to Great Swamp in Rhode Island to look for any evidence of Bigfoot. After walking 30 to 40 minutes down the main trail beginning from Great Neck Road, I took a smaller path off of the trail for about 5 minutes. That is when I noticed a young tree that was snapped in half at about 6 feet off the ground. More noteworthy, however, was a stick formation that I found a little bit farther on down the path, on a slightly elevated area of land. It was small, maybe 3 feet high, but constructed in the same woven-looking manner that have been characteristic of other possible Bigfoot stick formations. Other than that, I did not find anything else unusual. It might not be extremely compelling evidence, but I figured it was worth reporting and telling experts who could then take it as far as they see fit. End of story. Now, if you have your own big Rhody experience, we would love to hear about it. And if you have anything else you want to send our way, we love hearing your stories. You can always reach us at pvdweirdos@gmail.com. And with that, thank you for tuning in to Weird PVD, the podcast. And don't forget, keep PVD weird.